All right, Saagar, what are we looking at?
Well, a few weeks ago, before the crisis began, I issued a warning here. Not everything is Hitler, people. There are actually many other parallels of history of the European continent that you can compare the current Russia-Ukraine war to, especially, actual wars fought between Russia and Ukraine. But that nuance is lost on the media. It's lost even on the so-called expert class and what transpired over the weekend in one of the most revolting but important episodes that we've seen in media for some time. Let's start with how it all began. Former U.S. ambassador to Russia, Michael McFaul, a Russiagator and a war hawk in his own right, went on Rachel Maddow's program to castigate Joe Biden for declaring that the U.S. will never put boots on the ground in Ukraine. In it, he intimated that Putin is actually much worse than Hitler. No, I'm not kidding. Let's take a listen.
And I want to just say one other thing. I was just on Ukrainian television just 30 minutes ago. Brave journalists, just like our team covering the war there in Kiev. And one of the commentators said something interesting about how horrific this war is. And remember, these are people who suffered under fascism, that fought the Nazis. As the Nazis came and then the Red Army came back through. One of the Russian journalists said, there's one difference between Hitler when he was coming in and Putin. Hitler didn't kill ethnic Germans. He didn't kill German-speaking people. That's I think people need to remember that when we're talking about cities like Kharkiv and Mariupol and Kiev, there are large populations there, up to a third and sometimes as much to a half that are Russian speakers and are ethnic Russians. And yet Putin doesn't seem to care about that. He slaughters the very people he said he has come to liberate.
Oh, my God. There is so much to unpack there. Hitler didn't kill ethnic Germans. There are a lot of disabled or resistance-fighting Germans who might disagree with that. There are also, several 100,000 ethnic German Jews unavailable to comment, as even the Auschwitz Memorial highlighted in those ignorant comments. But beyond the reason to just show you how dumb these people are, is to consider that these are the people we are being led by, who have led us or are being led by right now. That man was the U.S. ambassador to Russia under Barack Obama. He went on national television to say that Vladimir Putin is worse than Hitler. Why? Because aside from his historical ignorant nonsense, McFaul's statement is calculated to make you believe if Putin is worse than Hitler, we have no options but to fight him in Ukraine and declare World War III. You can choose to see this as an isolated incident, or you can recognize the underlying danger in the mindset. The reason I see that is because people who are so-called Russia experts with real influence over our discourse in our relations with that country are insanely coming out to defend McFaul's statement. Anders Osland is the author of an influential book on Russian crony capitalism, wrote, quote, Hitler recognized Poland but called for concessions. Putin absurdly claims that Ukraine is not a state. Putin absurdly claims Hitler had left the League of Nations. Putin violates every international law there is. Hitler did not use chemical weapons. Putin is preparing to do so. Obviously, 6 million Jews disagree with that chemical weapons point, but does history even matter? This is not an isolated incident. Pavel Meyer, he's a former lawmaker in Germany. He jumped in as well to the discourse, noting, quote, Hitler did not use his office to extract bribes and get into bed with organized crime. So we could say in terms of civic values, Hitler was even a more decent person than Putin is, as crazy as that sounds. Yeah, it sounds pretty crazy, my dude. Once again, you are witnessing before you a concerted campaign to get associational thinking between Hitler and Putin. If that is accomplished, then you, of course, have the response. It's simple. You declare war. It has to be stopped. I find this so dangerous because in McFaul's case, he is a professor at Stanford. He was inside the Situation Room, helping make decisions less than a decade ago. How many more of his ilk are inside the government right now? You might cringe at what he's saying, but they agree with him, at least on the merits. That's the cost of Russiagate. The elevation of legitimately insane people to the front of the national stage, who the MSNBC audience has now been conditioned to trust. McFaul has been a fixture now on TV for nearly 5 years. The audience is built to trust what he has to say. He is the face of a number of Russiagators who are pushing full-scale war in Ukraine. Look no further. Alexander Vindman, you'll all remember him. He was the supposedly heroic whistleblower. He sparked Ukraine Gate and the impeachment of Donald Trump in 2019. Well, Mr. Vindman, now having left government, is openly criticizing President Biden for tweeting that the U.S. will not fight a war with Russia and Ukraine. Vindman writes, quote, "Mr. President, you're inviting disaster and emboldening Putin. This declaration invites Putin to pursue every means to subdue Ukraine. Of course, the American people don't want war with Russia, but they also don't want to watch Ukrainians slaughtered. We must do more." Okay, Mr. Vindman, what does do more mean? They never tell you that, because it means you might have to die for their insanity. You might say, Saagar, none of this matters. Joe Biden is clearly not listening to any of these people. And I would say, thank God, you're right, for now. But again and again, I've been terrified of this possibility. Joe Biden is an old man. It's not a secret. He's nearly 80 years old. And he's clearly physically flagging. His 79-year-old, barely beating heart is the only thing standing in the way of Kamala Harris becoming the president. And if you think she has the stomach to stand up to that level of institutional insanity, you are dead, dead wrong. I have found it incredibly difficult to parse what's going on in the last 2 weeks. I feel as if I'm on an island. It's okay to recognize that Putin's invasion of Ukraine is a terrible act, which should invite a response. It's also okay to say that the U.S. should not actively engage in any escalatory behavior to increase the risk of a nuclear confrontation against Russia. And I think it should also be okay to discuss openly in public the utility and the efficacy of the sanctions that we have deployed and their possible follow-on effects. None of that is represented in our public discourse today. What I know is that though it may seem popular and in vogue to beat the war drums and scream at anyone who disagrees with you, that the consequences of not engaging in a thoughtful debate are dire. Look no further in our current history than the buildup to the war in Iraq, or even in the buildup to the war in Vietnam. In both cases, we saw Hitler and Munich analogies being deployed by the presidents. We saw large public support for the wars, and we saw the American people's goodwill misused against them. Today, we see widespread public support for punishing Putin. We can only hope that the American people's goodwill is not yet again squandered, but the media environment today shows that that is very unlikely. I mean, the Vindman thing is a perfect example, right? Which is that this guy who's a hero.
Hey guys, thanks so much for watching.
That's right. Just as a reminder, you can become a premium subscriber today. Watch the full show completely uncut, our reactions to each other's monologues. You get to listen to it, you get to ask us questions, all that good stuff. Link is right there in the description or at breakingpoints.com.
Best of all, great way to say screw you to the mainstream media.